This Sunday on Capital Connection, Governor Pritzker is right now the richest elected official in the country, but he might not be for much longer if one New York City billionaire gets his way. How someone with 20 times as much wealth as our governor hopes to shake up the race for president. We talked to the senior advisor from Mike Bloomberg's campaign.
Mike Bloomberg now is polling in second place with African American voters, according to a number of recent polls.
Plus, a legal spat at the gaming board comes at a tough time for sports bettors in Illinois. How Rick Heidner's clash over a leak of his personal information to the feds could complicate the effort to roll out legal sports betting.
It appears as though information that was not legally allowed to be shared was disseminated.
And joining us on our Reporters Roundtable, Rebecca Anzel and Jerry Nowicki from Capital News, Illinois. It's all coming up on Capital Connection.
From the Illinois State Capitol Rotunda, Capitol Bureau Chief Mark Maxwell is asking the tough questions. This is Capital Connection.
Welcome to Capital Connection. I'm Mark Maxwell reporting from the Illinois State House on this Sunday, February 16. Illinois elects its preferred presidential nominee 1 month from tomorrow. The Democrats will be casting their ballots on Tuesday, March 17. And the race for president is heating up as Vermont Senator Bernie Sanders appears to be an early frontrunner. He escaped New Hampshire with a narrow win there and had the most overall votes in the Iowa caucuses, racking up 2 early presidential primary victories. He hopes to continue his momentum, but could he do it here? He faces not a straight path to the White House, but more of a staggered gauntlet, if you will, as 2 latecomer billionaires stand between him and the nomination. Tom Steyer, of course, already in the race, and more lately, former New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who skipped Iowa and New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada. Instead, he's jumping straight into the Super Tuesday fight, unleashing a massive ad buy, buying up space on broadcasts, in print, online, even having advertisements in memes on social media. And he's building out an army of campaign workers that includes an office space here in Springfield, of all places. Joining us now is Tim O'Brien, a senior advisor with the Bloomberg campaign from their headquarters in New York. Tim, it's good to have you with us.
It's great to be on, Mark.
Tim, this primary race is shaping up unlike anything we've ever really seen before. Usually by now, we see the field start to winnow as viable candidates, even some of the top names, start to drop out or feel pressure to drop out. But in this case, we're seeing big names get into the race, namely Mike Bloomberg, whose campaign you're working for. His entrance into the race has political analysts across the country saying things like, printed in The Atlantic, quote, "A long, drawn-out fight is more likely than ever for the Democrats." How does a long, protracted battle help Democrats come November?
Our view of this is that we're not late to this campaign. We're in 45 states and territories. We have 2,000 people on the ground. By the time all the other candidates come out of these first 4 primary states, we're going to be waiting for them with infrastructure and political relationships we've already been building for quite some time. There's clearly a divide in the party between the liberal wing and the more moderate wing. But I think net, voters are looking for a candidate who can unify most of the constituencies in the party and immediately take on Donald Trump. There is no one better suited to that role than Mike Bloomberg. He has more governing experience than anyone else campaigning, and he's got a strong sense of purpose and the organizational ability to cut through this confusion and beat Donald Trump in November.
Not that long ago, Joe Biden was a front runner in most polls nationwide and in top states, but he's on the ropes lately, finishing 4th in Iowa and then 5th in New Hampshire. He's really banking heavily on minority voters in South Carolina and perhaps in Nevada to really come to his aid, come to his rescue here and save him. This is a defining moment for the Biden campaign, and his rapid decline does seem to help Bloomberg in the polls more than perhaps any other candidate. So I wonder, is South Carolina Joe Biden's last stand? If he doesn't win there or finish in the top 2 perhaps, should he drop out?
Well, we really admire Joe Biden. We think he's an incredibly dedicated public servant who's had a long, illustrious history in the legislature, but clearly voters aren't rallying behind him. And I think we've seen a lot of gravity move towards our campaign. I think it's going to be up to Vice President Biden to decide what's the best outcome for him. And we can't really address that directly. But I think there's no question that people who want to see Donald Trump beaten, feel at sea with other choices, are coalescing around Mike Bloomberg now.
Biden's director of African American engagement emailed an audio clip of Mike Bloomberg describing stop and frisk policy in New York in rather callous terms in recent days. He later said he didn't do that as a campaign surrogate, really just on his own, but then Biden surrogates went on cable and really piled on. So too did President Trump. Let's take a listen to that audio.
95% of your murderers and murder victims fit one MO. You can just take the description, Xerox it, and pass it out to all the cops. They are male, minorities, 15 to 25. People say, oh my God, you are arresting kids for marijuana. They're all minorities. Yes, that's true. Why? Because we put all the cops in the minority neighborhoods. Yes, that's true. Why do we do it? Because that's where all the crime is. And the way you get the guns out of the kids' hands is to throw them against the wall and frisk them.
All right, so there are those remarks. I understand Mayor Bloomberg has apologized for the stop and frisk policy. He said he no longer supports that, but how can his candidacy excite the black voter base, a key constituency of Democrats in a primary? How can he excite that base to back his campaign with that kind of audio out there?
Well, there's a very clear answer to that, which is the polls. Mike Bloomberg now is polling in second place with African American voters, according to a number of recent polls. I think those voters understand the totality of his record as mayor. He wasn't simply about stop and frisk. Stop and frisk was wrong. Mike made a mistake. He will continue to apologize for it, and he will spend his public career proving to voters of color that he cares about policies that empower him, just as he did when he was mayor. I understand it's important to the Biden campaign to throw Hail Mary passes at this point, to try to sow division with other candidates. We're not going to go there. We're focused tightly on Donald Trump and beating Donald Trump. And it's clear that voters and everyone else in the Democratic field recognizes now that Mike Bloomberg is the person best suited to do that.
All right, but I do want to single in on this just a little bit more closely, because it's not just that he's now apologized for formally supporting what he calls a bad idea, but it was the content of his argument. It's almost as if he dismissed entirely the way we measure crime data, the way we measure for and evaluate whether or not discrimination is occurring. Does Mike Bloomberg believe that people of color face discrimination from law enforcement?
Let me remind you, in 2006, Sean Bell was gunned down in a hail of bullets in New York City the day before his wedding, a young man of color. When that happened, Mike Bloomberg, in no uncertain terms, criticized the New York City Police Department for excessive violence. He called in Sean Bell's family into City Hall, along with other community stakeholders and black ministers, as a sign of support. Mike Bloomberg has always believed discrimination is egregious. That's why he diversified the New York City Police Department when he was mayor. That's why the incarceration rate when he was mayor dropped by more than 34%. That's why he instituted the Young Men's Initiative, a model program for outreach to young people of color that Barack Obama modeled My Brother's Keeper on. Mike had the most progressive immigration policy of any big city mayor, and on and on. Stop and frisk was a mistake. It does not represent Mike Bloomberg as a person or a politician. On to your second point about Donald Trump choosing to try to tee this up. There is no president of the modern era who is a more overt racist and bigot than Donald Trump. No one compares to him on that field. Mike Bloomberg is a far more enlightened, compassionate public leader than Donald Trump has been or will ever be. And if Donald Trump wants to contest this as an issue, we are more than ready to take this right into his living room because he's reprehensible.
Now that we've registered the votes and counted them in Iowa and in New Hampshire, it's clear Bernie Sanders is a clear frontrunner, but there still remains those two divided factions on the left wing with Senator Warren and Sanders representing the progressive faction of the Democratic Party. And in the moderate centrist camp, you've got Joe Biden, Pete Buttigieg, and Senator Amy Klobuchar. How does Mike Bloomberg entering the race here change that? It seems like he's trying to, can he really leapfrog the other moderate candidates here and claim the mantle of the moderate centrist party, or does that further splinter that faction of the party?
I mean, the key differences between Mike Bloomberg and everyone running is that he has spent decades actually delivering results. He's not approaching voters with a bag of promises. He has a clear track record around job creation, affordable health care, access to high-quality public education, gun violence, and the climate crisis. No one else in this field is remotely close to Mike Bloomberg on these issues, and voters simply have to look at his record to see that. I would want to know a very strong, solid list of Bernie's legislative achievements or any of his other achievements on the things that he's saying he will solve for Americans. I think at the end of the day, voters are going to compare both these candidates, their policies, and their results. Most importantly, their results side by side. Bernie clearly hasn't assembled a leading coalition throughout the whole party. There was narrow turnout, low turnout in Iowa and New Hampshire. I think he still has to prove himself in more diverse, complex states, and we'll be ready to campaign against him in those states.
Senator Sanders says that Mayor Bloomberg is just trying to buy this election. I know the mayor has said he's not trying to buy it at all. He just has to spend a lot of money because he got in so late.
Nope, that's not what we're saying. We're not saying we're spending so much because we got in later. The DNC has $8 million. Their cupboards are bare. The RNC has quite a bit more money and organizational resources than the Democrats. It is a godsend to the Democratic Party that Mike Bloomberg is opening his wallet in the middle of a national crisis to try to fortify the Democrats. We have said repeatedly that the machine we're building and the resources we're putting into this will be at the foot of the party or whoever the nominee is. Mike
Even
Bloomberg
if it's Bernie?
Even if it's Bernie. We've said that. We've said we would support any candidate, including Bernie, and he knows that. Mike Bloomberg is not buying an election, he is buying exposure. If you could buy an election, Tom Steyer, who's been spending robustly and wouldn't still be stuck at 1 or 2% in the polls. Mike Bloomberg has surged in the polls because he has more governing experience than anybody else running. This is a distraction from his true record, and we're happy to debate Bernie on the merits of that. The reality is Mike Bloomberg cares about every single progressive issue that Bernie cares about. Unlike Bernie, he's actually delivered results around those issues. And unlike Bernie, how we would finance this is transparent. The math adds up in Mike's case. In Bernie's case, he's financing all of this with seashells and balloons, and voters deserve better than that.
All right, so say in the end it comes down to those two top candidates, Bernie Sanders and Mike Bloomberg. Bernie Sanders says we need a revolution, a fundamental change of the way we do things in America, especially the economy. Mike Bloomberg says, no, we don't need a revolution, we need evolution, which if I'm reading him correctly sounds more like incremental change. So help us understand, give us a preview of that debate. What is the contrast, the biggest contrast between Mike Bloomberg and Bernie Sanders on how they would run the economy?
I mean, the key differences between Mike Bloomberg and everyone running is that he has spent decades actually delivering results. He's not approaching voters with a bag of promises. He has a clear track record around job creation, affordable health care, access to high-quality public education, gun violence, and the climate crisis. No one else in this field is remotely close to Mike Bloomberg on these issues, and voters simply have to look at his record to see that. I would want to know a very strong, solid list of Bernie's legislative achievements or any of his other achievements on the things that he's saying he will solve for Americans. I think at the end of the day, voters are going to compare both these candidates, their policies, and their results. Most importantly, their results side by side. Bernie clearly hasn't assembled a leading coalition throughout the whole party. There was narrow turnout, low turnout in Iowa and New Hampshire. I think he still has to prove himself in more diverse, complex states, and we'll be ready to campaign against him in those states.
Can Mike Bloomberg excite Bernie's base? Can he appeal to the progressive movement in this primary race?
We will speak to Bernie's base. I don't know if Mike Bloomberg will excite Bernie's base. We already know that Mike Bloomberg is exciting everyone else because that's why he's surging in the polls. He's got a clear, demonstrable history of solving people's problems, and voters know that. Voters of every class, creed, and color, and that's showing up in the data.
All right, just about a month to go until Illinois picks its candidate to represent the Democrats in that big fight in November. Tim O'Brien, the senior advisor to Mike Bloomberg, thanks for joining us. When we come back, a look around the state at the top political headlines in Illinois.